people started having healings, real healings. They're getting up out of wheelchairs, and cancers are being reported as vanishing. People are showing me their laboratory work where the tumors have disappeared. People are getting up out of wheelchairs, hearing and vision is returning. Parents of my younger patients are calling me, and their children who had cerebral palsy or epilepsy are suddenly able to run and play and speak normally and not have seizures any longer. Not all of them, but a lot of them, a significant number. And we began to recognize quite clearly that something real, something substantial was occurring. So people would finally start to call it. Well, first they'd call and they say, "What did you do?" And I said, "I didn't do anything, and don't tell anybody." Well, of course, that went over about as big as just saying no to drugs. So, of course, everyone started coming in, going, "I'll have what she had." And the next thing we know, people started saying, "Teach this. Teach this." And I'm thinking, teach this? How do I teach this? There's no instruction book. I'm standing there waving my hands in the air looking like an idiot. You know, wave your hands in the air, look like an idiot. Tell me what happens. But more and more of my patients would call me after their sessions in my office and say, "When I got home, I walked into my house and my lamp or television started turning itself on and off and on and off, and I felt sensations in my hands, and my garage door opened when I had closed it, and I held my hands near someone in my family, and my uncle could walk again after the stroke, and you know, my mother's cancer vanished." And we found that once we interact with this, what the researchers are calling the reconnective healing spectrum, we're able to access it. And the researchers explain this by saying it seems to be something that was not here, has not been here on the planet before. And I said to them, "How can you say something like that? I mean, how can you say it wasn't here before?" And they said, "Well, it really makes sense. First of all, it gives us the gifts that we can access through any of the known healing techniques, old or even the new ones that are still coming out every year, because by virtue of it being a technique, it limits what comes through down to energy. It gives us everything that we can access through any and all of the known energy healing techniques. Reiki, Jirai, Jin, Shigang, Mashang, Beijing, EFG, XYZ, 1, 2, 3, you know, quantum this, and mattress that, and alpha, beta, delta, gamma. It seems that we can access all of these gifts of those techniques without
But you said also, I thought in your book, it is not energy, but it's light.
It is much more than energy. It includes energy, is the way they explained it. They said it's easy to understand if we take into consideration these two factors or understandings of quantum physics today. A, we are four-dimensional beings.
Yeah.
We're height, width, depth, and the fourth dimension is time. And in quantum physics, they illustrate this as a bubble.
Yeah.
So picture this little bubble, the wall of which is height, width, depth, and time. And this is our little four-dimensional bubble or playground in this vast, endless, multi-dimensional universe, like a tiny little champagne bubble in a sea that's endless as champagne. Here's us. And the interior of our bubble has been filled with energy. So everything that's been here has been energy. But what we know about time today is that time is moving faster. Not just in a linear fashion, beginning, middle, and end, but faster in all directions at once. In other words, what time is doing is it's opening up and expanding, which means that our bubble, our playground wall is opening up and expanding. So it is now encompassing what has always been out here, outside of our bubble. So it's timeless. But it's new to us because it hasn't been in here before. We have not been able to access it. Now this does not thrill a lot of the people in the New Age spiritual movements who want everything to be old. Because if it's old, then they can claim to already be familiar with it. They like to say, well, I remember this from a past life in Atlantis or Lemuria. Well, guess what? Sometimes something is just new.
There's old energies. Old energies are dead. That is new.
I'm not saying old energies are dead.
No.
What we're saying is the old energies are still here. This allows us to expand beyond them and include them. So now we have parts of this that are new. So people can't say they remember it from Atlantis or Lemuria, if, you know, and make their ego get all puffed up about it, because some things are just new, and isn't that wonderful? So what happens is now there's a more comprehensive tapestry. It includes the Reiki energy and the Qigong energy and the XYZ and the Alpha, Beta, Delta, and whatever we want to call the energies. The entirety of energy is just one portion, one subset of this new spectrum of energy, light, and information, and it includes energy, light, and information that wasn't here before. Now the funny thing is it brings about instantaneous dramatic healing.
Yeah.
That happened like that and seemed to last a lifetime, and it gives us a new gift, which we can also view as a reward, because we only get this gift or reward if we meet a certain challenge. For instance, the gift is that this allows us to completely transcend technique entirely. Any and all of our energy healing techniques, any technique whatsoever, this allows us to transcend it, and in return, we bring about or facilitate much greater levels of healing. The challenge is whether or not we are willing to transcend the techniques, whether or not our ego will allow us to transcend the technique, or whether we want to stand there saying, no, I spent my 3 weekends of XYZ technique and my, you know, €750 on it, and I want my little certificate piece of paper up on the wall. And some people aren't ready yet, haven't evolved to the point where they're willing to transcend the technique. Or you could say that the gift of this allows us to demystify, to completely demystify the healing process. But the challenge is whether or not we are willing to allow the healing process to be demystified. Now, if we're not willing to transcend the technique to bring better and more for our people, if we're not willing to to demystify the healing process and allow it to become completely transparent for everyone, then we need to ask ourselves why. And if we're not willing to ask ourselves why, then we really need to ask ourselves why we're not willing to ask ourselves why.
It's about consciousness also, because if you have a big ego and your consciousness is low, and then I think it's not appear, because you are sort of kind of blockade, I think so. Because also you said some people, when I did healing, it didn't work. Why? Because they have a big ego, or they are not so far, or...
Ask that question again. I'm not sure I understood what you said.
You said when I started with the Reconnection Healing, the most people get better, but some people don't.
What happened was, in the beginning, people would say to me, does everyone have a healing? And I used to say, no, it seems like maybe about 70% of them have a healing. That was because, at that time, my limited perspective or understanding of healing was basing it on, did the symptoms that the person came in that they wanted to get rid of go away?
Yeah.
So if the symptoms didn't go away, like in 30% of the cases or so, I'm estimating that percentage, then I would assume the person didn't have a healing. I know better now.
Yeah.
Because what started to become very clear was people would often come in with one problem and yet have another problem go away. And I didn't always know about it in the beginning. For example,